Hey, it's me, Bib. How are you today? I hope you're having a great day today. I'm excited to hang out with you today because today we are going to be talking about the Branch Davidians, including everything that happened with David Koresh and the FBI in Waco. I feel like this is a really well known story, but I wanted to talk about it in particular because of the Netflix show from a while ago. It came out when I was dealing with my Mormonness. If you're new here, I used to be Mormon. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Viv. I used to be Mormon. So, anyway, the show came out when I was deconstructing my Mormonness, as one does. It stars Michael Shannon as an FBI agent and Taylor Kitsch. I actually don't know how to say his name, and I didn't look it up, and now I'm too lazy to go look it up. Anyway, Taylor Kitsch plays David Koresh. When I watched the show, I noticed a lot of parallels, though, between David Koresh and Joseph Smith. So, it really kind of stuck with me. For this video, I wanted to do a deep dive, go really deep, go into the theology and everything behind David Koresh. Go on this journey with me. Go on this journey with me to discover it all. Let's dive in. Here's everything I found out. So we're going to start with a guy named Victor Houteff. And Victor Houteff was born on March 2nd, 1885. And he was born in what was the Ottoman Empire still, but is now modern day Bulgaria. As a child and everything, he was part of the Greek Orthodox Church. And as he got older, he got into mercantile trade, which, if you are like me, you might be like, okay, and what is mercantile trade? No, I totally know what it is. Just like, what is it though? But like, I totally know what it is. Okay, but like, what is it? It sounds so Shakespearean or Monte Cristo or something. I'm not sure specifically about Victor's exact circumstances of what he was doing, but basically, like, of what it looked like for him to be a mercantile trader. But basically, he was buying goods and reselling them, perhaps in some kind of art vandalay type style, importer exporter. I don't know. Like, he could have been buying raw goods and then selling them to other businesses to use in their products, or he could have been buying like finished products and being the middleman, like having like a shop. But that's what it means to be a mercantile trader. He was a middleman. He was a businessman, and he was operating a successful, competitive business with some family members, is what he expressed. But in 1907, he ran into some trouble because he said that he was falsely accused of conspiracy by some members of the Orthodox Church. The pressure from it was getting pretty hot. And in order to save his own life, that's right, apparently it got so hot that his life was in danger. Like, whoa, okay. Okay, babe, we get it. So in order to save his own life, he had to leave the country. Like, that's what it had come to. So he headed off. Bye-bye, Bulgaria. Hello, America. By 1919, he was in Illinois, and he was running a small hotel and a grocer. And it was at this point that he came across the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he joined up and he was baptized. And I think it makes sense. Like, he obviously had not had a great experience with his previous church that he grew up with. They, chased him out of the country. Probably wasn't feeling very devoted to that belief system, so he was probably pretty open to something new. Something else worth noting is that the Seventh-day Adventists were going through some stuff, like as a group, as a religion, at this time. Remember how I made that other video about the Millerites and how that was the beginning of the Seventh-day Adventist religion? Well, in that video, I talked about how it was 1844, like when the Millerite movement petered out. And then there were like some people who were Millerites who started the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I swear I'm not intending to do so much Seventh-day Adventism. I actually like had it in my mind that I would do the David Koresh story like from the very beginning, and I didn't actually know at the time that it came from Seventh-day Adventism. So I guess we're just getting the whole history of Seventh-day Adventism, you know? So if you want to know more about the start of Seventh-day Adventism, you can go watch my Millerite video. There are a few people credited with being the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ugh. It's going to turn into a tongue twister, this whole video. I just know it. They are people who took the Millerite stuff and ran with it. And one of those people is Ellen White, a woman named Ellen White. Okay, and I'm going to try not to go into her whole story, although she does seem really fascinating, actually. And it's fun to see a woman pop up as a founder of these religions because, you know, that doesn't happen very often. So, like, it is fun to get a woman in the mix every now and again, you know. But her parents, when she was a child, were Millerites. So then when Milleritism ended, she wrote, like, a lot. And she claimed to have hundreds of visions from God. And she was also a proponent of healthy eating and vegetarianism, which influenced cereal companies like Mr. Kellogg from Kellogg's. He was also a Seventh-day Adventist. And she was not the only founder, but she was the longest lived founder. So she died in 1915. And it just sounds like, from what I read, it just sounds like it really created a vacuum when she died for things to kind of get stirred up and reinterpreted. And just people kind of being like, okay, so like what? So like who's leading this church now? Like what are we doing now? You know, our last founder died. It left an opening for some leadership and theological changes to be up in the air. So this is the Seventh-day Adventism that Victor is joining up with in 1919. Like, she died in 1915, he's joining in 1919. You know, there's still a lot of unsettled feelings about the whole movement. Victor, though, he got so serious about the religion that he moved off to California. Okay, he uprooted his life yet again because he felt so passionate about this religion. So in California is where he could be closer to a lot of Seventh-day Adventist like members and groups out there. Like, it was more happening out there for Seventh-day Adventists. Okay, I'm gonna call from now on, I'm gonna say SDA. Okay, Seventh-day Adventist, SDA. You with me? So that I don't have to keep saying Seventh-day Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist. Okay, I'm gonna say SDA. Okay, SDA. We got it. Okay, locked in. Good. So he's out there in California hanging out with the other SDA members, being happy as a little clam, getting deep into it, you know, like we've all had this feeling, like you find a new thing that like really resonates with you and you're just like all about it, you know, like, yeah, we've all had that before. So he spent some time studying the Bible and he studied a lot of Ellen White stuff, and he became a Sabbath school teacher. So the Sabbath school teacher at the SDA church, that Sabbath school is the weekly Bible study lesson, and his lessons became really complex and long and attracted quite a large group every week. Just people liked his classes a lot. His classes were banging. He particularly focused his lessons in these early days, it was said, on Isaiah, because he believed that they were very applicable in the last days. Okay, so actually I do want to back up for just a second and talk about that Millerite video I did previously, where it was all about how the guy did careful Bible study to calculate what he thought would be the day that Christ would return to earth as a resurrected being who is like, as if Christ is just like hanging out in heaven, kind of just like waiting for the day to come down to earth again and as a resurrected person and like start the apocalypse. This is kind of a common, you know, Christian thing. This is the second coming, like that Christ was resurrected, and then as a resurrected being, he's someday gonna come back down to earth and like start the second coming, and it'll be the apocalypse, and there will be like judgment and blah blah blah. Okay, so that Seventh-day Adventism is very obsessed with this idea. That's what it's all about, is like trying to anxiously await this second coming of when Christ is going to come and usher in the millennium and the end of the world and the final judgment. Anyway, in the other video, William Miller like tried to put a specific date on it, and he ended up being wrong, like obviously, because hello, hi, I'm here, hi, how are you? I'm alive, you're alive, you're watching this, you're alive, I'm alive, we're all still alive. The world is still turning. So yeah, Christ did not come, but the Seventh-day Adventists, they started from this place of, they interpreted the date calculation that William Miller had done to be a heavenly event that like happened as a milestone before Christ really comes again. Okay, that had to happen up in heaven first before Christ can really come. Okay, the SDA Church, they're just like concerning themselves with prepping for this millennium. You want to be prepped, you want to be ready, you want to be considered amongst the righteous. There's a lot of just end of world type of fervor, like, which actually I really get, because this is also a thing in Mormonism, and there does get to be this sort of excitement about it when you feel like you're among the righteous. You start to sort of get excited of like, yeah, Christ is going to come and the world is going to burn all around me, but I'll be saved because I'm one of the righteous. Also, going back to Victor's Sunday school lessons about Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, it has a lot of content about Christ coming again and like dealing with the Israelites and the Gentiles and like getting all the righteous people together and repent of your sins and come unto Christ so that you'll be part of the righteous when he comes in the millennium, and like the wicked will be destroyed and the righteous will triumph. And yeah, I love destruction of the world. Like, you get it. So that's like what his lessons were about. So these classes were getting really popular, and for whatever reason, it started ruffling some feathers with the powers that be within the SDA Church. Victor claimed that the local church leaders, like the local SDA church leaders, forbade them from using the church building anymore to do the classes. They were like, no, this is getting out of hand. You guys can't use the church building anymore for these classes. They had to use a fellow, like one of the members, the class members' house to have the lessons. They kept having the lessons. They just went to, someone was like, we can use my house. And they were all like, okay, let's meet over there. And then the church leaders, you know, they wanted to put a kibosh on this class, but then it went on Victor. But that didn't work. So they started disfellowshipping people who were too into his teachings. Victor claimed that they also tried to have him arrested, like falsely arrest him, and they tried to get him deported, and they tried to get a court order demanding that none of the people who attended to his classes be allowed to attend the church services on Sunday. I don't know. It's hard to know exactly who is in the wrong here, because I can imagine a world in which things are like getting really weird in his classes. I have specifically had this experience as a Mormon, like some people who get like a little too into interpreting certain, you know, scriptures or doctrine in really weird ways that people glom onto, because people, we're meaning makers, and people get really excited about the idea of like new connections, new metaphors, new blah. So I can imagine like he starts preaching stuff that is like really out of line with official doctrine and beliefs or whatever, and then like making the church leaders start trying to, hey, stop that. Like, can you please stop that? But I can also see a perspective where like this is a newer religion that's already based on certain people like having gumption to interpret scripture like how they see it, and then people kind of just agreeing and following, and then that becomes the religion, you know what I mean? From some perspective, he's really just copying Ellen White here. So Ellen White is already someone he admires, so he's just kind of copying what she's doing, you know, kind of just doing the same thing she was doing. But you can also see how this situation like has echoes from his past where he was chased out of Bulgaria and falsely accused. And then like now again, he's like, you can't scare me off. Okay. I've done this before. I've been here before. I've been falsely accused before from, you know, the higher powers of a religion trying to chase me off. Okay. And you can't control me. Victor wrote his interpretations and beliefs about scripture that he was teaching in his classes. He wrote them into a manuscript that was called The Shepherd's Rod, which was a reference to Moses's staff with the snake when he, like with the Israelites, were wandering in the wilderness. And if they looked to the staff, then they would live. The staff with a dead snake on it, then they would live. Anyway, so it was a reference to that, and he called it Shepherd's Rod. So he believed that the SDA church was God's chosen church, but that it had gotten like a little off the rails and needed to be reformed and like brought back into congruence with God's will. And like, you know, assumedly since Ellen White's death and stuff, like, hey, we're not on track anymore. He felt that people were just not being righteous enough or whatever. And he had this main thing that was about this 144,000 reference from the book of Revelations, chapter 7. I did a little reading of this shepherd's rod trying to figure out what the 144,000 thing was. Because like honestly, I like if you read that chapter of Revelations, it just is not clear what the 144,000 really is supposed to be. It's, you know, like if you read the book of Revelations, it's a wild ride. Okay, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're not familiar with the book of Revelations, it's the last book in the New Testament. It's about the end of days and the apocalypse. Like there's a lot of symbolism and it's hard to interpret. I mean, it becomes kind of just gibberishy at some point because it's just so like wild and doesn't make any sense, really. That's what I think. Okay. I don't know. I used to pretend that it was a book full of great spiritual meaning. But now I can just say straight up, it's doesn't make a lot of sense, okay, if we're being honest with ourselves. So anyway, going back to the shepherd's rod that Victor wrote, it's really rather doom and gloom about how the Lord's church has fallen. I read some pieces of things. It was quite long and wordy, if we're being honest. It talks about how the Lord's church has fallen into wickedness and just isn't righteous enough. And then there's this talk of like the 144,000 saints reference from Revelation 7. And like, who are these saints? And he does actually reference Ellen White because she apparently did some expositioning about what this scripture reference might mean. Victor comes to the conclusion that it's going to be 144,000, that this reference to 144,000 is going to be 144,000 living people that will, of course, like be among the SDA church believers because like they're the ones who are really righteous, living in the true church, people who serve God. And anyway, so there'll be 144,000 believers who will like serve God in the millennium and like be really special and stuff. Like they'll just be extra super special people in the millennium. So that was like a particular thing that he like believed in and was preaching. But he wrote this, so he wrote down the Shepherd's Rod manuscript in 1929, and he started evangelizing it to members of the SDA church, even though he had been formally disfellowshipped. He sees himself, even though he's been disfellowshipped, okay, that doesn't deter him at all. He sees himself as a true believer who is receiving revelation about the SDA church and how it's falling away from what it used to be when it started. He is determined to share this revelation to help get the church back on track. The 144,000 saints will need to come from God's true church, which is the SDA church, and that as referenced in Ezekiel 9, that the righteous will be marked and the rest will be slaughtered. So, like, this is a matter of life and death in his mind. At this time, it was said that the SDA church membership was less than 250,000. And as he's sharing this message, it's having a significant impact on the membership, where he's gaining a lot of followers and, creating some power dynamics, because like the Seventh-day Adventist church actually isn't that big, like now it's however many million people, but 250,000, is not that big. And so then if he's taking chunks of a few thousand followers, that becomes a significant amount. He's still just writing stuff, and it's getting discussed in the Sabbath school, and the church is just trying to like disfellowship everyone who is studying and believing his stuff, and trying to keep it all under control, like trying to just like, oh, you believe that, get out, you're disfellowshipped. Don't bring that stuff to Sabbath school, okay? Get it out of here. But it won't be stamped out. And then, in disfellowshipping a bunch of people, that's kind of not their purpose either. They want to grow the SDA church, so they don't really want to have to disfellowship a bunch of people. Finally, in 1934, the SDA church leaders decided to give him an official hearing where they would study his writings and discuss it, because all along the way, he still kept insisting, hey guys, I've got these writings. Hey guys, you got to read this, guys. Please read this. But unfortunately, the meeting really flopped. It was determined that his writings were false by the FDA church. At this point, he had been telling his followers to just continue to maintain their membership with the SDA church, at least as much as they could, because obviously a lot of them were getting disfellowship. Their goal was to try to remain attached to the SDA church and just seek reform of the SDA church, like keep advocating for the SDA church to just reform to these things that they were teaching. I think that it seems like this only made things worse, because there were reports of conflict, like people being roughed up and escorted from buildings or barred from entering church services, and, some real conflicts that were kind of escalating. It probably just overall really contributed to more friction. The SDA church maintained that Victor was incorrigible and wouldn't listen to any voice except his own. The SDA church leaders, they insisted that they were forced to disfellowship him and his followers because they just wouldn't listen. They wouldn't engage in productive discussion about how they may be wrong. He and his followers felt that they were just dismissed out of hand constantly, and that the whole business was really unfair, and that the church leaders just wouldn't like take it seriously. They kept just dismissing and like laughing at him and not taking it seriously and not truly considering, with a prayerful heart. So to this day, his messages are considered hearsay by the SDA church, and they identify any branches of his teachings to be disloyal and divisive, and any followers of those teachings, like anyone found to be believing and following those teachings, will be subject to church discipline and possibly disfellowshipping. Again, the hearing happened February of 1934, and in March, the group Shepherd's Rod was officially organized, and it's now officially a separate offshoot from the FDA church. Okay, so now we're entering a new era. First things first, they sought out a new place to set themselves up and form a community. They were thinking somewhere rural, centrally located, where they could continue to bring their message to people, including trying to, infiltrate the main SDA church still, because they weren't going to give up. They still want to ultimately see the SDA church reform. That would still be best case scenario. Also, tired of getting kicked out of church services, tired of the conflict, so they want to go somewhere else. and do their own thing. They ended up buying land just outside of Waco, Texas, that they named the Mount Carmel Center. And the movement really flourished. Flourished? Flourished? I don't know. They had 125 people who lived on the compound itself. They built schools and a sanitarium, and they had vegetable gardens, dairy cows, fruit trees, the whole shebang. It was just a real party out there in Waco, Texas. Overall, they had several thousand followers. Sometime in the 40s is when they started calling themselves the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. So they went from calling themselves Shepherd's Rod to Davidian Seventh-day Adventist, which was based off of the idea that the organization was bringing forth something similar to the Davidic kingdom from the Bible, from when King David in the Bible was in power. The Davidian thing also underscored this main idea that Victor was teaching where their group would receive the truth first. Like their group was supposed to receive the truth first, and then it would be preached to all nations thereafter. And that's specifically an idea from King David's reign in the Bible, where it is believed that God promised that there would be a future king from David's line that would be Messiah and save the world, blah, blah, blah. So it would come from David's line first, though, and then be shared with the world. And so that they were like, that's like us. Victor continued to write and publish things that then got printed in the thousands and distributed. They were keeping busy. He was following in the footsteps of Ellen White and making sure to be a prolific writer and sharer of his preachings. His followers believed that he was the only one that was given the gift from God to interpret the Bible and reveal the secrets hidden therein about the end of times. They felt that he had this special, gift from God about it. Apparently, he also claimed he would not die. Then, suddenly, in 1955, he died of heart failure when he was 69. Oops! I just don't get this. When are we gonna learn to not say things like this? When are we gonna learn? This kind of feels like, didn't he learn anything from even William Miller all the way back at the beginning? You just don't make claims that you can't keep or that are easily falsified like that. I don't know. But it created a vacuum of power. Because, he dies when he said he wasn't going to die, and then he dies, and then it's just oh, well, that was wrong. It's a very, hello, you know what I mean? It's a very, hello moment. What? Why are we always trying to say things that definitely we're going to get proved false? I don't know. It's the nature. It's the history of this SDA church. It's baked into their culture, I guess, to make bold claims, just making bold claims, I'm never going to die. Christ is going to come down in 1844, and the world will end. I mean, I don't know. Okay, whatever. Anyway, so he died, and this caused a vacuum of power to suddenly appear, and then some power struggles ensued. And his wife, Florence, who was 34 years younger than him, she played the political game and ended up taking control. Now, I couldn't find a lot about what their relationship was like, because it's sort of where did Florence come from? She wasn't mentioned this entire time, But she was 34 years his junior. Oh, God. But she was 34 years his junior, I guess. So the information I found about her came from her obituary, which said that her family had moved to Waco, Texas when she was a teenager. And the marriage records also said that she and Victor had married in 1937. So she would have been about 18 and he would have been 52. Wild. That's okay. Choices were made, I guess. Then they had 18 years of being married, I guess, before he died. Anyway, it's 1955, and Victor has just died, and Florence wants to take control, but she was only a secretary of the organization, and another guy had been appointed as the vice president of the organization by Victor personally, and he was kind of like lined up to be the natural successor with the organization, like with how it was set up. So Florence, the day after her husband died, she called an emergency council meeting. She like went, focus mode. So she called this council meeting, and the VP guy, the guy who had been, made the VP by Victor personally, he happened to be out that day because he was sick. So with him gone, she was able to convince the council that the other guy should be removed as the VP and she should be put in his place. She said that it was Victor's wish that she take over after him, and that he had said as much as before she died. She was like, guys, take my word for it. He said that. I'm not kidding. He said that. So the council was just sort of like, okay, fine. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then the next day after the meeting, one of the council members was like, wait a second. Something's not sitting right with me. What proof do you have that it was Victor's wish for you to take over? And she was like, okay, I don't have any, but trust me, bro. Trust me, bro. She just laid it on thick about private moments between husband and wife. I don't know. Whatever she said, they still agreed to make her vice president and kick the other guy out of his role. It's also possible that maybe the other guy was unpopular. I don't know. But she played that game and she won. The first thing she decided to do as VP was give the VP more power, obviously. Even with all of this political maneuvering, there was still trouble lurking with others trying to grab her power. Like boogeymen just hiding out, plotting, waiting to grab her. A few months after Victor's death, a member of the group named Benjamin Roden claimed that he had received new revelations from God and that he was supposed to be the new leader of Shepherd's Rod. What a familiar trick, huh? Just insist that you have received special revelation from God and thus God has chosen you to be the leader of the group. You can't fight God's choice, He's been chosen by God. Florence may say that she's been chosen by Victor, but I was chosen by God. Some people started to believe Benjamin Roden, and others were still hung up on the believing Victor was the only one given power to reveal the secrets of the Bible thing, that thing. They were kind of hung up on that. This part does get a little confusing because I believe that Florence continued to technically be the leader. But Benjamin was writing these letters and calling them prophecy. And Florence was like, no, they're not prophecy. But people were reading them and some were believing them. And then Florence was like, well, I can have prophecies too. She published this prophecy about Revelations chapter 11 in the Bible. She claimed that it was actually also prophecy from her husband's writings, even though no such writings were ever found. But in this chapter of Revelations, it talks about how there will be 2 witnesses that will prophesy of Christ and share their testimony for 1,260 days. And they'll be unstoppable, unkillable until the end of those 1,260 days when they will be killed. And then in which their bodies will lay in the street for 3.5 days, so 3.5 days, until they are resurrected and prove to be just a miracle. I'm laughing because this is also a chapter that Mormons believe. So I deadass also used to believe that this would be, something that would happen in the last days. Anyway, Florence predicted that this chapter and the 1,260 days would happen from November 1955 to April 22nd, 1959. And then, like, at which point the truth would obviously be undeniable because a couple of people would have been literally resurrected in the street. After that, according to the book of Revelations, Armageddon would begin. And then it would be the end of the world. So, like, she's putting a lot of faith into April 22nd, 1959 as like the day when this amazing miracle is going to happen, and then Armageddon's going to begin. Once again, in true Adventist fashion, she's out there making prophecies about when miraculous events from the Bible are going to come to pass. She's putting dates on it. Okay, she's making bold claims. Benjamin rejected her prophecy. He was like, no, that's dumb. And both of them really dug their heels in. Benjamin's group sent a letter to the main SDA church saying that they rejected Florence's predictions. And Florence's group sent a letter to the main SDA church challenging them of how if her predictions came true, then they wouldn't be able to deny the validity of their group anymore. Okay? And they would be forced to face the truth. I just really wonder what this was like at the main SDA church headquarters, where they just like, yeah, don't care. It's like two little annoying siblings trying to make their problems your problem or something, but like, we do not care. Well, it was April 22nd, 1959, the time for Florence's prediction to come true. And it came and it went, and obviously nothing happened. And her whole thing just really fell apart after that. The people who had been her close followers had like prepared for the end of the world and sold their possessions and said their goodbyes. So they were very disappointed when her predictions were wrong. And then some people left the movement altogether. Others went off and reorganized, sticking to the original writings of Victor. Those people are still around, I guess. But it seemed like even Florence herself became disillusioned. So she announced intentions to disband the Davidian organization. And she sold off property and assets. And some of the council members who were still loyal to her, like, really didn't want her to dissolve everything. They were like, no, Florence, we can still save this. Let's do it. Let's keep at it. But she just didn't want to. She sold everything, and it was all settled by 1962, and she walked away from it all. And I bet that was like such a stressful time of her life, and it probably felt so good to just walk away and stop fighting. Her obituary says that she then moved to San Jose and got a job at IBM, where she met her new husband. And like, she continued to be interested in Bible study, especially the book of Revelations. And then she died at the age of 89. So good for her. Just like a weird chapter in her life, I guess, that she moved on from. After Florence bowed out, Benjamin swooped right in. He took control of what land was left and bought some of the sold off land, like the land that she had sold off. He bought it back, and he and his followers took up the cause to start building up a community there. And they called themselves the Branch Davidians, like keeping the Davidian name from before. But when Benjamin would write these letters of his revelations from God, the letters that I mentioned before, he signed them with the branch, which was a reference like to the anointed branch from Zechariah. It was a title of the Messiah from the Bible. So they took that into their name, and they were the Branch Davidians. There's really not a lot of information about Benjamin Roden, but he had married a woman named Lois, and they both converted to the SDA church by 1940, and they were disfellowshipped when they started following the Shepherd's Rod stuff a few years after that. Benjamin was originally Jewish, and the main theology themes of his like revelations and the letters, it was about restoring Israel to prepare the world for Christ's imminent return. He also added in like this piece of observance of Jewish festivals, including Purim and Passover. The letters generally challenged previous authority and like established him as a living prophet to receive inspiration and interpret scripture. And that was like kind of a big deal. Like Victor kind of had that status of like being the only one who could interpret the scriptures a certain way or whatever, but he took even more of that kind of position. And so he used it to position like other previous revelations as like being incomplete. And also he positioned himself as being a King David type figure. Like I grew up Mormon, so I'm used to this idea of a living prophet. Like that feels really normal to me. And like, oh yeah, of course. But apparently that was a new thing for them, like always having this perpetual living prophet called by God to give you like, you know, prophecies, like constant updated prophecies like for your day. That was new for them. And there is not this idea of like a living prophet for the SDA church. That is not a thing. His prophecies, though, also included the hallmark general themes of the apocalypse and like judgment and preparing for end of times. La la la. Okay, that's already kind of baked into the whole religious movement. That's what it's all about. So he's officially branded himself as this living prophet, though. Benjamin died in 1978, and his wife Lois became the next prophet of the group and took over the compound. Though she did have a son named George that thought she like shouldn't be leader, that he should be leader. He wanted to be leader. He officially challenged her about it when she took over, but it like didn't get anywhere and she remained the leader. I don't think George was very popular. So anyway, George is going to come back in the story in a little bit. Lois, she brought a feminist slant to things and claimed that the Holy Spirit, like, you know, the Godhead of like God the Father and his Son and the Holy Ghost. She claimed that the Holy Ghost, she was like, yeah, that's a female, which is also apparently a callback to Ellen White, because apparently that's like an idea that Ellen White kicked around. Lois also brought ideas of equality of men and women to the movement, which like, good for her, girl. She actually got wider recognition for being someone who brought to light a woman's place in religion, especially with this magazine that she started that was called Shekinah, which covered such topics. Shekinah is a Hebrew word that relates to the feminine aspects of God. Anyway, she called it Shekinah. And Shekinah, I think actually both might be correct. I looked it up. Okay, whatever. You'll tell me if I'm wrong. Then in 1981, a 22-year-old guy named Vernon Wayne Howell came to the compound and studied under Lois, and that's when things really got going. Okay, so let's back up for a second. Vernon Wayne Howell, he was born August 17th, 1959, to a 14-year-old girl named Bonnie. Like, whoa. She was also not married to his father, who was 20 years old. Like, yikes. Oh my God. Ugh. If his mother was 14 when he was born, that means that she was likely 13 when he was conceived. And like his father, like, ew, like what? Oh God. Oh my God. What a nightmare. His dad really should have been arrested. Vernon never even met his father because he ran off. His father ran off before he was even born. So, unsurprisingly, he had a pretty rough start to life. His mother, Bonnie, she got married shortly after he was born to a recently released convict who was violent and physically abusive, abusing both him and Bonnie. Like, it was just not a good situation. Like, Bonnie had gone from one bad situation to another bad situation. So Bonnie ended up making kind of a smart decision and left the baby with her mother. But then, confusingly, her mother pretended to be Vernon's mother, and like Bonnie would pretend to be his aunt when she would visit him, which, like, I don't know. Okay, it was like early 60s, so like I guess I can't judge, but just weird. Bonnie got married in 1964 to a new guy, and things were finally more stable. And she was like, I want to take Vernon back as my baby. So she took him back to raise him. And this reveal of his true mother was something that Vernon said was very dramatic for him. And he said that he like carried this wound with him his whole life. Like he never got over it. He also said that it was around this time that he started being, sadly, sexually abused by one of his mother's male relatives. The family moved to Texas, and then he had a brother who was born, a half brother who was born, that he did get along well with, but he really never got along well with his stepfather. He also had dyslexia, so he did poorly in school and was teased. He said that overall his childhood was just quite sad and lonely, and he ended up dropping out of school his junior year of high school, and he tried to start working, but he was just a terrible worker, kept getting fired or just not showing up. I mean, he's a teenager, so like, yeah, I'm not surprised to find out that he hasn't yet learned how to be a good worker. So at 19, he had a sexual relationship with a 16-year-old girl who then got pregnant. And she apparently realized her mistake like real quick, because she refused to ever let him see their daughter, since she just felt that he was unfit to be a father, and moved away. It was like she got pregnant. It sounds like she got pregnant and something just like clicked for her, where she was just like, no, like you're not fit to be a father. Shortly after that, he became Christian and joined the Southern Baptist Church, but he soon joined his mother's church, the Seventh-day Adventists. And it was in this congregation that at 20 years old, he started a relationship with a 15-year-old pastor's daughter, which like just feels really inappropriate. But I don't know, his dad was 20 and his mom was 14 when he was born, so like I don't know, maybe it doesn't seem that scandalous to him or something. I don't know. There's this story where he was reading his Bible and like praying about his Bible for guidance, and then when he opened his eyes after the prayer, his Bible was open to Isaiah 34:16, which contains this phrase. So like his eyes fell on this phrase in the Bible: none should want for her mate. And then he was like, aha, answer to my prayers. God must want me to marry her, marry this girl. So he went to her father, the pastor, and told him, hey, like, I received revelation that I'm supposed to marry your daughter. And like, as a former Mormon, I have to say I'm very familiar with this narrative, this experience of men receiving revelation that like they're supposed to marry a particular girl. Nah, consent be damned. Like, her wishes don't even come into consideration. But you gotta marvel at the nerves of steel of this guy. Like, he's going right up to the father of this teenage girl and telling him that he's been told by God to marry his daughter. So like, okay. And her father was like, no, gross, get out. I never want to see you again. Thank God for this father and his reasonable response and like being a responsible person for his daughter. Well, Vernon ignored him and continued to see her anyway. I am kind of curious about her perspective of this relationship. Like, was she just really swept up in the romantic notions of this much older guy wanting to marry her? Like, what does she think about it now? I really hope that her life turned out wonderful. I guess conflict continued to escalate because he was expelled from the church, and it says that he was expelled because like that pastor was furious with him. Also, apparently the members were like repulsed by his obsessions with sex. That's what happened. Like, wow, it sounds like some things really ramped up, you know what I mean? Hey, so it's a new day, and that's not a big deal, right? Okay, good. Also, my hair like is doing something right here today that I don't like, so I don't know. Just Pretend that's not there, okay? So, Vernon, after being kicked out by the SDA church, he ended up moving to Waco, Texas in the summer of 1981 at 22 years old, or feeling 22, and joining the Branch Davidians being run by Lois Roden, as I mentioned before, okay? So, we're back up to that timeline. He took to it really quickly, and after only 2 years, he started claiming that he was receiving prophecy. I guess just on par with anybody who gets really into this particular branch of Seventh-day Adventism. He, followed suit saying he was receiving prophecy. He'd also gotten really close with Lois because, like, she was allowing him to start teaching these messages he was receiving. So instead of her getting involved in some kind of power struggle with him, she actually embraced it because they were close. She really liked him. But it did ruffle some feathers that she allowed him to do this and kind of take on this bigger role, because a lot of people were like, what? Why? Like, who is this guy anyway? It particularly angered George, her son. So remember how he had challenged her authority when she first took over, but then he got shut down? Well, he has been sitting waiting in the wings, ready to take over next when his mom dies. Okay, he's just been sitting there like, okay, well, fine, okay, she can be leader, but I'm gonna take over when she's done, right? Lois herself did not favor George at all. I don't know what this relationship was, because apparently she just really didn't favor George. No one liked him, not even his own mother. Very sad. It created this weird dynamic where George feels that he should obviously be the next prophet, obviously, and he's practically chomping at the bit to step into power, but Lois starts grooming this other guy, this other random guy. So it's making George really angry. Also, to make things much worse and a lot more awkward, it's said that Vernon began a sexual relationship during this time with Lois. I guess we really can't be surprised based on what we know about Vernon and just his complete lack of understanding around appropriate sexual relationships. He started saying that God had chosen him to father a child with Lois. And he claimed that the resulting child between their union was destined to be a chosen one, or Messiah type figure. But Lois was in her 60s. She's already been married, had kids, and had her husband died and stuff. So if you might be thinking but what? I thought I was under the impression that Lois was pretty old. You're correct. She was in her 60s. So what? Having a child with Lois, what? I guess that he just thought that divine intervention would take over, create a miracle here. Mary was supposedly a virgin. So I guess that maybe it's a logical leap when you believe in the literal reality of that story, thinking that he's super special too. And so God is gonna intervene and make miracles happen, I guess. I wonder what Lois was thinking about it. Did she think this was wacky too? Or I don't know. It just, was she into it? Would she, I don't know. It is the question though. So George, he's power hungry and he is super mad about Vernon being around, and he felt threatened by Vernon getting close to his mom, and how his mom really was open to it. She was letting him share these prophecies, and he was getting concerned about their relationship, which, to be fair, if it was my mom, I would be concerned too, considering the things Vernon was saying about having a child with her. But George's motivation for his concern for his mother was not about her and loving her, but rather the feelings that Vernon was trying to swoop in and take what George felt belonged to him. It was about his concern for the relationship was not out of, a place of love for his mom. It was about like, hey, you're taking my spot. Hey. So George filed a lawsuit against Vernon, claiming that he had raped his mother and brainwashed her to turn against him. So like he, taking it to a serious place. Not much seemed to come from the charges, but it did begin the long pissing match between Vernon and George. This is where Lois's story like kind of peters out. She technically remained the leader of the group until she died from breast cancer in 1986. Very sad, but all the drama that was happening between George and Vernon for years leading up to her death, she didn't seem to be much involved. Like perhaps she was just busy, dealing with the cancer. I assume she had bigger things on her plate than getting involved between the petty disagreements between these two people. Okay, so Vernon was doing some teaching amongst the group, which meant he had some followers, and tensions were getting really high between him and George while they were living on the compound together in Waco, Texas. And then in 84 or 85, I couldn't find a definitive date, but a fire in the administration building on the compound, it caused a bunch of damage. And George immediately was like, it was Vernon. It was Vernon. He must have started that fire. Jacuse! Vernon was like, wasn't me, dude. Okay, I don't know what your problem is, but it wasn't me. It was probably God sending a message about like his judgment or something like that. God is trying to send us a message. George was just so incensed by this response. So he told Vernon and his followers, just get the heck out. Get out of here. He ended up forcing Vernon and about 25 of his followers off the property by gunpoint. George is not messing around, and he has been looking for any excuse possible to get rid of this guy from when he first arrived. Vernon and his followers started camping out in Palestine, Texas, which is only about 90 miles from Waco. It sounds like it really sucked. They were living really primitively in buses and tents for about 2 years. And during this time, Vernon went to Israel and said that he had a vision there, that he was to be a modern day Cyrus the Great. Now, if you're like me and you're like, okay, who's Cyrus the Great? Cyrus the Great he was a Persian king who was born in 600 BC, who is talked about in the Bible and is said to have freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity. Vernon, he says that he is a modern day Cyrus, also destined to carry out this divinely commissioned errand like Cyrus was. And in Isaiah 45:1, Cyrus he's called anointed, which the term Messiah can also mean anointed one. So then Vernon was like, See, there have been many messiahs throughout history, not just one, okay? Like Cyrus was a messiah. So same with Christ. There's not just one messiah. And I am specifically meant to be this messiah for the end of times. Like I've been sent to be the messiah for the end of times. His big mission as messiah for the end of times was to liberate his followers from the modern day spiritual Babylon, which he said was the corrupt secular world. He believed that he would lead a holy war to destroy God's enemies. I'm sorry, this is very serious stuff to Vernon. It's just quite far-fetched. He would lead a holy war to destroy God's enemies, mirroring the military success of Cyrus in destroying the Babylonians. Somewhere around this time is when Vernon started using the last name Koresh, which was a Hebrew transliteration of Cyrus. As far as I could find, he started using Koresh as his last name first, and then at some point he also started using David as his first name, which was again a reference to King David from the Bible. I also found references to him saying that God's name was Yahweh Koresh, so like he was saying that he was taking the last name of his father because he's a Messiah. So, like, just like Christ, like, God is his literal father or whatever. So, this is how David Koresh came to be David Koresh, even though he didn't legally change his name until 1990. But I know you were probably thinking, like, who the heck is Vernon? Reveal! Vernon Howell was David Koresh all along. Twists everywhere in this twisted tale, this gnarled twisted tale. Vernon Howell is actually David Koresh. David and his followers have been living quite primitively and preparing for a holy war and working to recruit followers. Then Lois died, and because they were actually technically chased out before Lois died. So then they're living out primitively, and then Lois died, and it kind of left the group wondering, like, if they would ever be able to return to live in the Waco compound ever again. It was George. George was the problem because he still got this bitter grudge against David, and David has only convinced even more people to follow him instead of George after Lois's death. And I guess that George was just really unpopular. He just was not well liked. He was a weirdo. Okay. I think that perhaps we can see that he's a bit of a weirdo. He's power hungry. People are not resonating with George. Okay. They're preferring David Koresh over George. George decides the best way to handle this is to challenge David to a contest to see who the real prophet is. The contest that he came up with was that whoever could successfully resurrect a corpse from its coffin would be proven as the rightful prophet and leader. Yeah, I know that would be pretty convincing for me too, if someone were actually able to raise a person from the dead. That would be pretty convincing, I guess. So I have to give him that. So George is like, okay, I challenge you to this contest. And David's like, you're on. So George goes about exhuming a corpse of a woman who had died about 20 years earlier. And he was like praying over her corpse to resurrect her. George, like, he's just not right. He's just not right. David, he's actually no fool, okay? He uses this moment to report George to the authorities about how he's digging up corpses illegally. Like, you can't just go about digging up corpses, okay? That's illegal. And the authorities are like, okay, what the hell? And George was like, no, I was just moving it to the cemetery. I was just moving the cemetery around. I wasn't digging up corpses to try to resurrect them. So the authorities tell David he's going to have to provide some evidence to prove his allegations because, like, I guess that this is a pretty hard story to take seriously. Koresh and some of his followers decide to just storm the compound with guns. They said that they were trying to get photographic proof, but like they didn't even bring a camera. So they were like, "Oh, we were trying to get proof, the proof that the police were asking for. We were trying to get proof of him, doing these things to a corpse." They instead brought just a lot of guns and a map of the property that was like a battle map with tactical positions to occupy labeled on there. They apparently were not very sneaky though, because George spotted them when they were trying to like creep in. And so a gun battle broke out and George ended up suffering some minor gunshot wounds. David and his gang were charged with attempted murder. But then another interesting twist, his followers were found not guilty. And David's case ended in a mistrial, and their guns that were confiscated by the police were actually returned to them. So that definitely had to feed into David's ego about, like, feeling that he was untouchable. And it's just really too bad that David slipped right through the system unscathed at this point. George, in 1989, he ended up murdering a man with a gunshot and an axe blow to the head of this guy. And it was a guy who had come to him and claimed that he was also a Messiah. And George was like so incensed by that he killed him, and he claimed that the guy was sent to him by David to kill him. Like, he said that David had sent the guy to George so that the guy would kill George. That's what he claimed. And so he claimed, like, George claimed that he had to kill that guy because he was sent to assassinate him. So George had definitely become a little too obsessed with David. George ended up going to trial and was found not guilty, actually, but that was because he was ruled insane and was confined to a psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life. It's very sad. Guy does not seem like he was set on a very good path from the beginning, but he left a lot of unpaid taxes on the Waco property that David Koresh and his group started paying. So then they moved in and started treating it as their own. And that's how they ended up reclaiming the property in Waco. That has to feel pretty good for David and his followers, like as if it's God's hand guiding you, because it's another kind of just like lucky break where things sort of just worked out for him. Like, not only did David avoid any punishment for his group's misdeeds with the gun shootout, but he was given this window to swoop in and take over the Waco property, and it just really worked out in their favor. Let's discuss some of David Koresh's theology at this point, because talking about the theology is actually my favorite part. So one of the grossest parts about his revelations and teachings was that he was tasked with fathering a new house of David. Like, remember how he changed his name to David because he felt that he was literally a King David figure. And this goes all the way back to Victor, if you remember, where he was saying that a Davidic kingdom was going to be restored on earth. So, like, David Koresh started saying that this is how it's going to be done, basically. Like, he's going back all the way to when Victor said that and being like, okay, like, it's going to happen now, and it's going to happen through me fathering a bunch of children, because I'm going to be the King David figure. All the women in the community were now his spiritual wives, even if they were already married, and they're only allowed to have sex with him. And he was trying to create this pure lineage of 24 children, and all the other men were expected to remain celibate so that they wouldn't contaminate the lineage with their imperfect seed. He is the only male that is allowed to father any children, because he's the only one who is pure enough for such a thing. He's been called by God, damn it. He's got to do what he's got to do. And then the other big thing that he would often go on about theologically was about the 7 seals from the book of Revelation, chapters 6 and 7. The 7 seals is this idea of like a magic scroll that has 7 seals. Like, there's 7 parts to this scroll that are sealed up, and only the Lamb is said to be able to open it. Like, only the Lamb has divine authority to open these seals and usher in whatever each seal contains. The Lamb is a reference to Christ, saying that Christ is the only one with authority to open it. But since David, like I mentioned earlier, claimed that there were actually multiple messiahs and that he was one of them, he said that he was the one who was worthy to open these seals in the last days. He also claimed that Jesus was the Messiah, like without impurities or sin, like without any iniquities. He was the perfect Messiah. David, he considered himself this sinful Messiah, or like a scapegoat that is prophesied to carry out the end times mission. So wait a second, what was this magic scroll thing with the 7 seals? What was that you were talking about? They are just prophetic events leading up to the end times, and they're like all catastrophic in nature. So the idea is that this magic scroll or book or whatever, this is a thing that I also like would sometimes get talked a little bit about in Mormonism when people would get into apocalyptic stuff. And I don't know, I always had a super hard time trying to visualize what this was, but it's the book of Revelations, okay? It's just wild. The book of Revelations is just wild with its crazy symbolism and imagery. So it doesn't have to make a lot of sense in that way. So just stick with me here, okay? But the idea is that this magic scroll or book or whatever it was had these sections that are all like sealed up and they can't be opened except by this person with divine authority. Most people interpret to be Jesus, but David Koresh believed that it was him. So like whoever you believe is the lamb. And then when this person then opens each of these sections like in succession, the thing contained in that seal like gets unleashed on the world. When all the seals have been opened and like all of these horrors in succession have been unleashed, then it will be Christ's official like return and the end of the world or whatever. You've probably heard of some of these things contained in the seals because they have made their way into popular media. So I'll just list them here. Okay, so like here they are. Okay, the first seal is a white horse that brings conquest, or an antichrist that brings false peace and deception. Okay, the second seal is a red horse that brings war, taking all peace from the earth and leading to bloodshed. The third seal is a black horse which brings famine with scarcity and economic hardship. The fourth seal is a pale horse. I don't know why the other horses get colors and then this one's just pale. Okay. Which brings death, bringing widespread death by war, famine, plague, and wild beasts. These first four seals are called the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Like you probably heard of that before, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That's what they are, is these first four seals of these seven seals. And then the fifth seal is that martyrs will be slain for their faith and cry out for justice. The sixth seal is cataclysmic events like the sun turning black, earthquakes, stars falling, the moon turning blood red, which is all a signal of God's wrath and the coming day of judgment. That's another one that I feel like makes its way, like the moon turning blood red and the stars falling. Like sometimes you hear about that in, popular media or whatever. The seventh seal is that there will be a great silence in heaven and 7 angels will appear with trumpets and some more terrible wrath from God, and then culminating in Christ's return to earth, where he will finally step onto stage and be like, ta-da, here I am. And that's the 7 seals. David told his followers that they were living in the time period of the 5th seal, which was the one about martyrs being slain for their faith and crying out for justice. He said that he was going to be martyred in his efforts of leading this holy war, and that the apocalyptic prophecies and ultimate establishment of God's kingdom contained in the book of Daniel would be fulfilled in Waco. So that's a lot. Like he's setting the stage here for violence, basically. Like the followers should expect violence as a logical opposition to their faith, and that they must be willing to keep their faith to the death. Violence only proves these prophecies and their faith to be correct. The world is literally about to end. So shit's about to go down, We've already seen how they have made progress in their mission through violence and with the shootout with George. It's like all tracking here. And they're feeling that David is obviously a prophet, which leads us to how the group started taking this mentality of like turning Waco into a fortress. They started fortifying and stockpiling guns and weapons because they feel that they are preparing for more inevitable violence, like especially with an eventual showdown where they may be killed as a part of this 5th seal prophecy, but they need to go down fighting in the name of righteousness. Okay, so these are people who are prepared for a great final righteous, war here on earth in which they need to stand in their faith and fight to the death in the name of of righteousness and God. Like, God is asking them to fight to the death. That's what they feel. The group is living in this compound in Waco and preparing for the end of days with David as their prophet and authority to guide them through it. And to have money for the compound because, like, they still gotta, eat and everything. They decide to start a business called the Mag Bag, which was a licensed and legitimate firearms dealership. Like, it was a legitimate business. I guess when it comes to trying to make money, it makes sense to monetize what you're already doing, I guess. They're already stockpiling weapons and like preparing for war, so they might as well just like start this, firearms business. In May 1992, a UPS driver was delivering a package to the business and it accidentally broke open in the truck when he was delivering it. And it revealed some stuff like for making grenades, which like he found very concerning, obviously. So he made a report. And the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF for short, we're going to use that. We're going to use the ATF from now on. Okay, that's what I'm talking about when I say ATF is alcohol for tobacco, or I'm sorry, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Okay, ATF. Even if you're a licensed firearms dealer, grenades are still a no-no. So then in November 1992, that was May when the UPS driver with the package made the report. So in November of that year, a couple who lived nearby, they made a report to the sheriff that they had heard machine gun fire coming from the compound, which like machine guns also were a no-no. I know that may like come as a surprise because America and it's Texas and all, but there are supposed to be some limits around guns and things and weapons. So the ATF, they obtained a search and arrest warrant for David and certain followers, and they began planning a raid on the compound. There were a couple of things that happened before this infamous 1993 raid that really ramped up tensions. First of all, the ATF claimed that they had evidence of a possible meth lab. So like that's bad. Also, this was during the heyday of the like war on drugs stuff in the United States. So, that was being taken very seriously. The ATF does not deal with drugs. So they were claiming this evidence of a meth lab and then using it to request even more military personnel and military assets to do this siege, like to do this raid. This brings up a little bit of controversy in the aftermath of everything that happened because it does seem like maybe the ATF was reaching with this claim a little bit because they wanted more military resources, which like obviously only contributes to the escalating tensions of the situation. When you ask for more military resources and try to like go in like really hot with a lot of force, then it increases tension, with a group that is already prepared to fight. Factually, the Branch Davidians were not dealing with any drugs. They were very anti-drugs in their religious beliefs. They were doing all kinds of shady things, but drugs were not one of them. So this was an unfounded accusation against the group. The other thing that ended up ramping up tensions as well was a local newspaper. They wanted to publish an investigative expose on the group detailing these sex abuse things that were happening and the stockpiling of weapons. And this expose, it called for immediate action from law enforcement to do something about it. From what I read about this expose, it sounds like both parties were just not forthcoming enough to each other because they didn't trust each other enough, I guess. The ATF, they found out about how the newspaper wanted to publish this expose, and they were like, no, don't publish it yet, okay? And the newspaper was like, okay, but why? And they did decide to hold off on publication for a period of time. The way when I read about this, my interpretation was that like the ATF agents were being really cagey because they didn't want to give away any information about their plans. Like, they didn't trust the newspaper people. And then the newspaper people felt like they were just sitting on their hands doing nothing, and it was their duty as, reporters to expose this. They're news people. This is their job. They have to expose these kinds of things so that action can be taken. So anyway, the newspaper ended up publishing everything on February 27th, 1993. The ATF had their raid on February 28th. So it was just really quite bad timing. Even though the ATF had discussed pushing back the raid in order to better prepare, but then the publishing of the newspaper article made it made them feel pressured that they had to just go ahead and do it, even if they felt that it was a little rushed. So they're off to a great start here. Then, to make things even worse, a news crew got tipped off about the raid, so they headed out that morning to go film it and get coverage. But they got a little turned around out there, in the middle of nowhere. So one of the guys from the crew was like, "Hey, look, there's a mailman. There's a mailman over there. That guy is chatting with the mailman, asking for directions." And then he ends up telling the mailman something big is about to go down. So guess who that mailman turned out to be? He ended up being the brother-in-law of David Koresh. So the brother-in-law mailman, he hears this and he immediately hightails it to the compound to go tell the group that law enforcement is here and shit's about to go down. The Branch Davidians, they spring into action. They've been preparing for this for a long time, for this showdown. So they ended up having 45 minutes before the agents showed up to prepare for the raid. But then, in another little twist, there was an undercover agent in the compound who then reports back to the ATF being like, "Hey guys, they know." But then the ATF just decided to go ahead anyway with the raid. I don't know. I guess they were too far along at this point. Can't back down. I don't know. If you know anything about the story, then you know that it does not go well. A 2-hour shootout ensues with heavy gunfire for about the first 45 minutes. 45 minutes of heavy gunfire, and then a slackening of fire after that because the ATF started running out of ammo. But the Branch Davidians did not run out of ammo, just the ATF. The ATF ended up negotiating a ceasefire and withdrawing after 2 hours because they officially fully ran out of ammo. In the negotiation of the ceasefire, they were allowed to collect the dead and wounded. And in all, tragically, there were 4 ATF agents who were killed and 16 who were injured. There were also, sadly, 5 of the Branch Davidians who died in the shootout. And an additional guy was shot by ATF agents after the shootout when he tried to re-enter the compound. David Koresh himself was injured in the shootout, and he got shot in the stomach and the hand. Okay, so that was a total disaster. And that only made everything worse, way worse. So they called in the FBI, and the FBI takes over the situation. They proved to not be great at handling things either. The FBI team immediately surrounds the compound. They're kind of split in their strategy between those that want to use a lot of force and let's get these suckers, and those who wanted to take a more patient negotiation-based approach. With this split, they can't really come to a consensus on what strategy to take, so they end up taking the worst case strategy, which was to try to do a little bit of both. But then both sides ended up kind of constantly undercutting each other's strategies throughout the entire standoff. So it was not very well led or organized, okay? The FBI cut phone access to the outside world so that the Branch Davidians were only able to talk to the FBI negotiators. In the first few days, David Koresh was actually like, "All right, we'll come out." But then when it came time to actually come out of the building, He was like, JK, God told me to wait. He did end up releasing 19 children, though, so that was a partial win. But there were still 98 people that were like in the compound still holed up. The children that were released were interviewed by the FBI and the Texas Rangers, which is like a Texas police force, and they determined that the children had been physically and sexually abused for a long time. This information really changed the tenor for the FBI, because they started thinking of it more as a hostage rescue situation. Like, we got to get them kids out. The kids, they're being abused and held hostage. So that's the way the FBI started thinking about it at that point, more than just like their original idea, which was these are a bunch of crazy radicals stockpiling weapons and committing weapon crimes. Now they're focused on the children and the idea that these children are being held hostage in the compound. The FBI sent in a video camera for the group to record stuff and like send it back to them. And the videotape included footage of more children still inside, including some female minors who claimed to be his wives in the video. And it also included a message from the Branch Davidians, like, see, there's no hostages here. Everyone wants to be here. Which, like, yeah, okay. Only because everyone inside has been groomed to see this as their destiny to die in the fight in the name of righteousness in order to gain salvation. And the only person they can trust is David Koresh. Many days passed, and as the days went on, the people on the FBI team who favored force started winning out, and they would do things like blast loud music and sounds all night to cause sleep deprivation to try to like force them out of the building. The FBI brought tanks to start knocking down fencing and crushing cars. They generally like patrolled all around to increase this sense of fear. Okay, they're getting serious. They're not messing around. And they cut power and water to the compound, trying to increase the pressure of like, you gotta come out. If you want clean water, you gotta come out. This drew a lot of criticism to the FBI's tactics. Like, okay, you have this guy that you know is unstable leading this group in there, and then you're purposefully going to drive him more crazy and like try to push him over the edge. Like, that doesn't seem like a very smart strategy. There were scholars who had experience with zealous religious groups that were trying to persuade the FBI to stop. Like, hello, you were just proving them right in their beliefs that this is an apocalyptic scenario where they will fight to the death. You're just showing them they're right and that they're gonna dig in their heels. They're prepared for this, okay? You are acting exactly how they were expecting you to act. David ended up sending out a few more followers, but in all of this conflict, when they're trying to get the children out and the children didn't want to leave, the FBI was like, what? Why would the children not want to come out? Which, you know, is kind of absurd because the FBI is acting like aggressors, and the children also knew that the previous kids that had been released, that they were like separated from their caretakers. Like, the caretakers had been arrested and everything, and the children knew that, so they were afraid if they went out they would just be, you know, separated, that they would have to see their parents get arrested, they would be taken away from those they love, and like be placed in the hands of these people that they see as the devil. And then the FBI the whole time is like, why don't the children want to come out? Why don't the children want to come out? As the days went on, David started getting more and more into what the FBI called Bible babble. He's saying that he has to write things and that he must finish manuscripts before he can leave and come out. And because in his mind, when he leaves and come out, then he's going to, you know, be killed. So he's like trying to finish all this like final work, and write all these manuscripts, write all these prophecies down, you know, before he dies. There were several times that he said that he would come out, but then like he would backtrack because then he would say like, oh, my writings aren't final and I need to complete them. On April 19th, the FBI launched a more direct attack because they were just officially tired of this standoff. And they were like, we got to do whatever is necessary to get those kids out. Also, realistically, it was getting pretty expensive and they were just tired of waiting, spending the money and waiting, and they want to go home and not be doing this anymore. There's a lot of blame and shame that goes around about who specifically is responsible for the use of CS gas, which CS gas is a tear gas, and it's supposed to be non-lethal. But the FBI decided to use it, and then they just kept using so much of it when the Branch Davidians were not coming out like they expected and wanted. So absolute chaos ensues where fires break out and buildings collapse. Only 9 people end up leaving the compound, and the other 76 people that were still inside ended up dying. In the autopsies after the fact, there were many who were crushed to death with debris. Some died of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation. And then there was evidence of many being shot, and the medical examiner determined that they were probably mercy killings, like when it was determined that there was no way out, that it was, the Davidians shooting each other out of mercy. David Koresh also died from a gunshot wound in the head, and there's really no way to know exactly what happened, especially because his remains were badly burned. So there just wasn't, like, he had a gunshot wound to the head, but there wasn't a lot of other clues or evidence to be gleaned from the body since it was pretty burned. But the FBI official speculated that he had been shot by his right-hand man, who died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, because like the right-hand man, he probably realized that he was dealing with a fraud in that moment. So like they say that that he shot Koresh, the right-hand man shot Koresh before committing suicide, because like it was revealed to him in that moment, like he had this moment of clarity that David Koresh was a fraud. My take is that is stupid. That is a stupid interpretation. Like, maybe that guy did shoot David, but I don't see why he would have realized in that moment that he was dealing with a fraud and then decide to shoot him over it. Like, this is all exactly what David said would happen. They were in this fight to the death. So if anything, this guy would be like, it's all happening exactly as you said it would, David. So why would this right-hand man have some kind of awakening of the fraudulent nature of David in this moment? Like, he wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense at all, and it just points to the overall attitude of the FBI just not understanding these people, not caring to understand these people, escalating at every turn, trying to diminish their own culpability in what happened. Like, the FBI just doesn't want to admit that they made some real bad moves. Like, there's no doubt that David Koresh was not a good person and he deserved to be stopped. But law enforcement all along the way just couldn't seem to like see past their own noses, and they made it all about their ego. And tragically, so many people that they were supposed to save ended up dead, partially because of them and their choices. Like, a lot of that was because of them. But fair enough, the Branch Davidians were like really obsessed with this idea of having a violent apocalyptic final battle to the death. The FBI didn't intentionally go into the battle being like, yeah, we're going to fight to the death. Like, they weren't intentionally trying to do that, but they certainly were not very understanding or compassionate, and they made it all about their ego. So, the Branch Davidians, on the other hand, were the ones who were prepared to turn it into a death battle, like expecting it and preparing for it to be a death battle. So it was just a bad situation all the way around. It's really sad that the Branch Davidians were made to actually take it all the way to a battle to the death like that, because law enforcement came in and played the part so perfectly. Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed this story. I know it ends on quite a bummer, but I hope you enjoyed this deep dive, like from a perspective of more emphasis on theology and beliefs. This story really speaks to me because, you know, as a Mormon growing up, I can see some parallels between David Koresh and Joseph Smith. Also, the apocalypticness. There is like getting caught up in the apocalypticness is a weird thing. Like, it's because some of these apocalyptic things are things that also popped up in Mormonism, you know, being obsessed with the like, we're in the final days and we need to be concerned about our righteousness, and, you know, and looking for signs of the times, and this sort of excitement that comes up about the end of the world and like watching the world burn around you, but getting to be counted among the righteous. That's also like a Mormon thing that people really enjoy. People enjoy looking for signs of the times. Why would there be so much of an excitement about the world ending? Like, I don't want to watch the wicked burn personally. I think that sounds traumatic, even if they are wicked. I don't I don't love the idea of the destruction of this beautiful earth that I call home. You know, I can't even stand global warming. Okay, that already like breaks my heart so much. So why would I be so looking forward to destruction and of the end of the world? I don't but it's weird how it really like takes on this life of excitement. Like, it becomes kind of exciting. So I kind of get it. Anyway, I enjoyed hanging out with you. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. I make these videos because I find it interesting. It brings me so much joy to know if you thought it was interesting, that you enjoyed listening, that you got something out of it. I hope to see you next time. Okay, love you. Thank you so much. Bye.